everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Irina Cismas, Head of Marketing at Custify, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Summer vacation feels like a distant memory now, and we are officially in autumn, about 33% loaded to be exact. And just the other day, I saw a post on LinkedIn that said only 3 more paychecks until Christmas. And I thought, man, time really does fly. And somehow it's up to us to decide how meaningful we make it, right? And for CSMs, that time often gets eaten up by customer meetings, 50% or more if we are not careful. And that's why today's discussion is so important. And I've invited 2 amazing women who know all about making the most of customer meetings. And joining me today are Cristina Rotari, Head of Customer Success at SmartDreamers, and Amy Newbury, Head of Customer Success at Kleene. And together we'll explore how to prioritize these meetings, how to prep for them, and most importantly, how to turn them from routine check-ins into opportunities for deeper engagement. After all, time is precious, not just for us, but for all our customers. And no one wants a meeting that could have been easily an email.
Indeed.
Cristina and Amy, welcome. And thank you both for taking the time to share your insights with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Same here. It's actually my pleasure to have you both on stage. Before we dive into our discussion, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. This event is being recorded and you will receive a copy afterwards. I know that this is the main question everyone asks. I couldn't join. Do I receive the recording via email? Yes, you do. Another important aspect, we really value your participation. So feel free to ask all the questions using the question tab or chat function. We'll try to answer them throughout the session or during the Q&A at the end. You will see me going and looking at the top question. I'm not typing or doing something else. I'm actually checking for the questions. And one more thing, just a quick note about us, about Custify. You are probably noticed that time is a big theme today. And of course, no one wants to spend it on repetitive and tedious tasks. And that's where Custify comes in. And we help you automate those customer success workflows so we can focus on the conversations that really matter, the ones that deepen the relationships and drive value. So if one of our team members reaches out after today, don't ghost us, please. We promise you not to waste your time. And who knows, we might actually help you save a ton of it. And without further ado, I want to set the stage for today's discussion by hearing from our audience. I think we have almost 45 people who are watching this. We are live with us. And I want to know, what's your biggest challenge in prepping for those customer meetings? And give me a few seconds to actually publish a poll. And poll, hopefully, is it displayed? Did I manage to? Do you see it, Cristina?
No, it's not visible. No.
Okay. Okay, okay, no, what's your biggest challenge? Okay, because I didn't publish poll. Okay, now can you see it?
There is a notification. Yes, it's there in the poll tab.
And I actually started that. People started to vote. Please give it no. Okay, guys, please use the. We started receiving some answers on the chat. Please try to actually vote in the poll. I'm curious actually which one is the biggest, and yeah, it seems that engaging the right stakeholders in this moment is the biggest one, but also following up effectively after meetings. Okay, I suggest we give it a few more I would say minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, and while we wait for the votes to come in, I want to talk about why these challenges do actually matter. And I want to ask you both, what's the trickiest one from your perspective? What's the most difficult one? I'm not sure if you voted it or not, but from your perspective, let's do a round. Shall we start with you, Cristina, and then we move to Amy? I'm curious.
Sure. Well, it really depends on the circumstances you are in a company within a certain time. It can be if there are fewer colleagues that can help you with lack of preparation. If it's just you within the conversation with the customer and there are a lot of changes, engaging the right stakeholders. So as in marketing, we say it depends. For me personally, right now, it's engaging the right stakeholders and not from the perspective of pinpointing that person, but getting time on their agendas. I think the fatigue of the meeting is there. Everyone is online. They have the status call, internal calls, partner calls. So if you want to get the time for a QBR or an executive business review, you have to really make up for it to be right on point, exact for the goal-driven approach. So engaging the right stakeholders and bringing that value across the noise that they have in their calendars.
Amy, what's your favorite challenge?
I think at the moment for me, it's probably lack of time to prepare. But I think that's just like your classic scale-up problem that you have where you've got almost like all of the tools, it's all recorded, it should be super easy, but actually going all the things that happen from one quarter to the next, having that time to really truly prepare for meetings is difficult. And I think we'll probably be running through some tips later on about how you can overcome that. But I completely agree. I think depending on where you're at in a customer's life cycle and obviously contract renewals and stuff like that, if you've got upsell goals as well, engaging those right stakeholders or trying to impress upon your day-to-day stakeholders that like, oh, could you please bring this person with you is always going to be really difficult. So it depends on whichever goal you've set out for that call. I agree.
For the first, I wanna let rest assured the audience that we will gonna tackle how do we involve the right stakeholders. So we'll tackle this later on. And you mentioned time. Amy, I wanna start with you. Actually, when the time is tight, how do you make sure you are prioritizing the most important things for the customer meetings?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it goes down to great templating, to be totally honest. So I often can like reuse previous material, and then we have like note taking that works, which is AI driven, so you can ask it some questions. I find that really helps. But equally, I'd say like having a really strong relationship with your customer, regardless, where it's okay to ask stupid questions, can also be a really good use of time, because that like gets you up to date with where they've been in a very short space of time. Or you can just say like, I know you were doing this last time. Where are you at with it? Frankly. And then that gets them engaging with what they're actually truly focusing on right now. So it depends on how strategic you want to be with a meeting. But I think ultimately, like if you go into it with goals, you need to prepare for those objectives and goals. However, if it's just a general kind of QBR, you're in a happy BAU state with the customer, just ask them questions, because you're always going to get useful insight out of it.
I really like that answer, and I would say there's that saying that there are no stupid questions. So I think we can ask whatever, and okay, whatever breaks the ice. Cristina, how do you ensure the right stakeholders are involved when it feels like there are so many people to choose from, and it seems to be the number one challenge mentioned by our audience?
Yeah, by myself included. It really depends on the size of the client and how many stakeholders are there and the goal of the specific meeting. So let's take some examples. If it's a QBR and it's an operational QBR where we have the influencers and the people, the day-to-day users that want to see the progress, but there is no need for the person with the money to be there because they are engaged with the more strategic approach. We just align with the team members accordingly, and with the client that we can do like a short QBR or send out the deck over the email in order to make up the time. If it's a more strategic approach, let's say we are closer to the renewal or there is an upsell opportunity, of course, involving the influencers in order to assess the goals that we have for that meeting. So to get that contract expanded, and who will be the right person, what that right person is interested in, how we should position the message in the right way so they find that meeting interesting. And after reviewing the goals, the aspirations of that meeting, do your discovery sessions in order to see what those people engage on the social media, in case it's not a person you've had the chance to meet. Or if it's a person that you've had the chance to meet, however, you don't have a strong relation, and there is, I don't know, salespeople that have a day-to-day contact, make sure to bring the counterparts, your colleagues, to be there to validate your speech, to acknowledge the goals and give you an extra layer of credibility and trust.
You mentioned one thing, and I want to ask you, you mentioned that if the QBR is towards the renewal moment, you try to also involve the decision maker. And I want to ask you, what if you cannot reach out to that decision maker? And I know that in some cases, those decision makers are not actually interested in joining those type of conversations. So how do you spark up their interest into joining this meeting and not ghost you?
Yes, well, usually prep mode. So agenda, we work with high-end clients. So in order high touch, in order to prepare for the QBR, we have to have a certain list of goals, send those goals towards the, let's say, the person that has the money and it's hard to reach, and try multiple railways, my email, the phone number, the LinkedIn, the salesperson involved that has the relationship with that stakeholder, the influencer. So to try to tackle from various angles in order to make sure at least to get some feedback loop. Why is the reason? Is it timing? Is it, I don't know, not say the lack of interest, but more in case it's the needed approach for extra discovery or maybe needed information in order to be prepared for a QBR, to see if we need to make like a step-by-step approach towards this meeting in order for them to join.
You know what, I'm curious. Sometimes a full-blown meeting isn't actually necessary, and some things can be sorted out in an email. And as you mentioned it, at some point, even some of the QBRs can be streamlined via an email due to time or due to other reasons. Now, I'm curious, how do you both decide when something needs a meeting versus when it can be handled with a simple email? And more than that, how do you, or are there situations in which customers are asking for an email rather than a QBR or rather than a face-to-face meeting? And those would actually mean signals that the relationship is going south. Because I will be honest, I had my fair chances. I ghosted the QBRs, and usually because, they were not interested. I considered them a waste of time, and I knew that at some point I'm going to cancel the contract. So it's like, you know what, we can do it via email. You send me your presentation via email, and we tick a box. So how do you decide when it's an email or if it's a meeting? And if you are ghosted, it's signal that things are not going to go well. Amy, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that like a key signal can be if a client starts to disengage with meetings altogether or numerous members of the team. But I think that actually signals more clearly a break in your process when it comes to QBRs. It means that the QBRs that you've held before with them haven't actually been seen as a valuable enough way to spend time. And I think that's when you need to fix the root. We have gone through this iteration before, where actually they were much more transactional with the meetings. So we were having these sort of either monthly or quarterly meetings with customers and coming away with not much evidence of progression, and customers not necessarily, you could tell you were just on there to say, how are things going, and back and forth. So we did a ton of work maybe about 18 months ago to make sure that each of these QBRs were coming out as almost being like two-way streets and very effective meetings for understanding deeper business goals, future goals, what's driving that business, and also what's driving those individuals to succeed within those businesses. And it means then that actually the email that used to be a meeting, we think we're finally getting to a point where almost the renewal conversation can be much more transactional. That can be done potentially offline for the most part, because you've already built up all of the levers through having effective QBRs where you can piece together actually the journey that they're on. So if you think that a customer is in a stable enough position, because you've had loads of really valuable QBRs with them over the course of the past year, to then say to them, and the culmination of this is, these are the three options for renewal, let me know if you'd like to discuss them. It means you already got that level of confidence when you go into actually renewing this customer. Although this is something that we're testing at the moment, so we'll see how it goes. But that's my kind of hunch right now, which is that you've done the big conversation and there should be fewer surprises. And that's happened over a series of effective QBRs.
Yeah. I agree. The value of the QBR is the key. So unless it's valuable for both the customer and the business, it's worth doing. Otherwise, it can be structured in a, I don't know, weekly, monthly call, and you review the all the 3 months that were passed. In case it's a seasonality type of client that don't have a lot of activity, there is no worth making a QBR, because you might get that decline, but it might not be specifically a lack of interest. And you should ask yourself, is it my goal just to reach a QBR in my task list, or is it really bringing that value to the client? And as Amy has mentioned, build up the momentum for the battles that really matter. So in that case, it's the upsell, maybe a QBR at the beginning of the year, and setting up some long-term goals, and a QBR towards the end of the year to see how you progressed. And the storyline is what matters, not just ticking the boxes of the frequency.
If you don't mind, there are some discussions on chat. I'm also monitoring the two. So a disclaimer: I'm actually seeing what the others type on chat, and I want to address one thing Giselle mentioned on the topic of progression with customers. It is frustrating when we provide best practices for success, and yet the customer fails to follow CS expert advice and then fails to join the meetings. It all goes back to, ensuring the ICP. Have you experienced a similar thing when you try to do your best, and the customer decides that he knows them all and ignores the interaction? How do you handle this objection?
Should I go, Amy?
We will do around. Cristina, you'll take this.
I think it's more of a question for expectation for the CSMs to think that everything comes from the first try. With a customer, you can have a customer for 4 or 5 years and still have the struggle to push for specific elements. So it's more circling back when the timing is right, and keep on educating the customer for, the business goal you see, the success that they're going to get, translate everything in their words and their business outcomes in order for them to get to the point when they're ready to assimilate these best practices. So to quote Lenin, repetition, it's the key for success. So repeat in various modes the same storyline through writing, through QBRs, through the recurring meetings, in order to get to the right door where the information is ready to be received.
Amy, do you have, are your customers more obedient and more,
To a point, we tend to have quite very technical customers. So for the most part, people tend to be kind of like subject matter experts. But I do completely feel this. And I think that almost you need to remind yourself when you're having this issue that customer success is part of the kind of sales revenue org as well. And if you think as a salesperson, I love hearing my sales team thinking up ways to approach customers differently and being like, hey, you're wearing some of their shoes today. Can I take a picture of them and try and see if this gets a response, right? That's a silly example. But in customer success, sometimes you've got to accept that potentially your approach isn't compelling enough. And actually, could it be that you're either not asking them the right questions? If you're constantly pushing the same message at them, maybe it's not actually going to be the message that sticks. Maybe it's about saying, what is your biggest problem this week? Or like this quarter, what didn't go so well for you? And like, how can we help to fix that? And sure, they might say like something that your platform can't help with, but equally you might say like, honestly, like we've had 3 people go away and I'm really struggling to stay on top of this. And you'd be like, great, well, maybe we could help simplify this. Maybe I could do you a quick list or take a little bit off your hands using this tool, for example. So again, it's about understanding maybe those pain points a little bit more rather than just saying the same message repeatedly, because clearly it's not working and it might take a long time and they might churn in the interim, which obviously we don't want.
Cristina, let's speak about how do you prepare for the process of, how does the preparation process look like for those type of meetings, for the QBRs, for the EBRs, and what are the must-have data points that you bring to the table? Where not necessarily, don't say it as a data point that you include in the presentation, is more like, okay, how do you prove that the tool that they are using is basically helping them achieve their business goals, and how do you prove your contribution to the client's business?
So again, it's important to see if this is a new client or a client that has been using and been part of your portfolio for quite some time. For example, if it's the first QBR, for sure you have to take the T0 momentum from the moment they started using your services or your platform to the moment you are presenting. If you had the value one, something just to catch their trust that they purchased the right product and they are on the long term with you. So this will be one of the main goals for such a QBR, and presenting that from T0 to T1. Then what we expect in terms of product adoption or services adoption, if this is, again, it's a new client, and what are our plans for the next quarter? So more being close to this type of user, influencer, new kid on the block, let's put it this way. And of course, translate everything into ROI in their language. So if that's, I don't know, reducing time or operational costs or time to value and so on, practically to include these in the decks. Customers usually don't have time to do market analysis. So if you have the possibility to include that every time, it's from the personal examples, I noticed that it's that thing that sticks with them, and it reminds them they want the decks, they want to get more information. So competitors, if you can include, if that's such of business line that you can provide, of course, that also is part of the QBR. And as a preparation part, in line with the product teams internally, with the business goals of the company you represent, what are the modules you can promote for potential upsell or renewal that will drive, I don't know, additional regions to the platform or additional users or departments that can use your service. If we talk about the client that is more seasoned in the portfolio, of course, comparison, I don't know, last year with this year, last quarter with this quarter, depending on the values they have. They might be power users of your platform, so adoption might not be the key. but those trends, those percentages, those hidden elements that they don't pay attention into analytics might make the difference, and stay on top of your competitors because they are breathing down their neck. So in this case, you have to be aware not only with the product releases that are happening in-house, but also what's happening within the market, because all of a sudden you're in a QBR or in EBR and there is a question, do you have, I don't know, AI capabilities in a certain element of the product, and you are taken by surprise. So be prepared with this information, with what's happening in their market and your industry.
I never thought about including. I always thought that in the QBRs you only focus on the business value, and I never thought about included market analysis. Staying on top of the competition, including product things. So there are so many. It's like a 360 approach.
Yes.
At least in your case. Amy, how is it at Kleene? How do you prepare for those type of meetings?
Yeah, I think in a similar way, like you need to be constantly aware of what's going on within kind of both like the market in a general sense, but also it never hurts to just do a little bit of research into what's happening in that specific sector of the customer you're about to be speaking with. I think from like a personal level, before you enter any QBR, and this is something that I really encourage my team to do, which is almost scenarioize. So work out what could be the best outcome for this call and what could be the worst outcome for this call, and then prepare yourself for both situations. So I do a bunch of coaching in my team, and over time, I kind of noticed a bit of a pattern, which is that often where people weren't necessarily able to recover very quickly or didn't interrogate a situation further is because they've been taken aback. Either a customer says something really good to them, but they don't necessarily, then capitalize on it, are able to then take it forwards and actually turn this into like a useful conversation where they've got all of the information out, because it's almost so good they're not prepared for it. And then similarly, if it's bad news, rather than, again, using the time on the call when the information is fresh to combat that or even to like mitigate the situation at hand, again, they're getting taken aback. So it's like, if you know that a customer's had a particularly good period of adoption, or you've seen through LinkedIn, they've maybe raised some money or they've hired some people or whatever it is, it could be that you're coming into good news. And if so, let's prepare for that. Likewise, let's prepare for the worst, where actually they've been bought by a company. That means that they're going to consolidate all of their platforms, for example. We could be part of that. However, do we have a chance at getting through, and etc. So there are lots of ways, I think, to prepare for it. Templating, listening back to calls, understand the market and stuff. But I think on a very simple, practical term, work out what might happen in this call in advance. And that's the best advice that I can give to anybody building a QBR. Because the worst thing that can happen is you just have no idea and you go into it and you have a surprise.
I know that I often I often hear this question on Slack CS communities or in some LinkedIn groups. People are asking for a structure or a template for QBRs. And I know that most probably you'll say, well, it depends. I want to be able to at least offer a bit of guidance. And now that what Cristina said earlier with, competitive analysis with all the data points, and I feel the need to ask both of you, what's your go-to template structure? How do you include it? And I think the most important is provide also the logic behind the structure and the template that you are using, because that's my personal thing. I noticed that what works for company A, it doesn't necessarily work for company B. So if we go and in this webinar, we are telling our audience of 50 plus people joining us, okay, this is how you should structure your QBRs. I don't think it's the right way. So let's mention or let's give examples, but also with the logic. Why did you go with this and not with any other thing? Maybe it's something which is particular to the product that you represent, or maybe to the industry in which you are activating in. I think the logic behind the template and the structure is more important. So let's focus on that. Cristina, we start with you, and then we move to Amy.
Yeah. Well, out of the customer success, QBRs was and is my favorite topic, let's put it this way. And it has been a journey of iteration. So as you mentioned, Irina, trial and error. At the beginning, for me personally, it felt like a lonely journey and a lot of pressure and anxiety when QBRs had to be built, because there was a business goal on the line to make the customer happy, to align all the stakeholders, to make sure you include in the deck the right amount of data. So I think in that momentum, particularly, you're losing within the presentation, as Amy has mentioned, that the spark of joy, the moment to ask the question. You are a one-man orchestra, and that in the long run, for me personally, was like a challenge. How do I find a solution to be aware and be able to ask questions, and also have all those elements, the decks, the data in the right spot. So after many iterations and ways of structuring the QBRs, now within the team at SmartDreamers, I think we got to a point where it's not stressful because the responsibility is spread across subject matter experts. So we take the product, we take the client, we take their goals, and we set up the storyline for this particular QBR or EBR. We start a deck, an empty deck, and we mention based on the storyline and the agenda, okay, from the 2 to 10, this is the person responsible to insert the information. Since, for example, I'm the one creating the storyline, I mean, I understand the customer, and I can say, dear Diana, in this case, you have to focus, I don't know, for this period of time, I want to showcase, Germany in the certain market. I want to showcase that we are good with this goal. So everything aligned to the goal. So the subject matter expert takes the data and makes it shine around the outcome that you want to achieve throughout that particular QBR. So once you structure and you involve a lot of people within the team, two things happen. First, the anxiety of building the QBR, it's taken out of the question. So you are responsible for a couple of elements within the storyline, and you focus on those. In my case, it's market analysis, there's competitors. I look from a strategic point of view. From an operational side, I have the team that is strong from the day-to-day activities, and they understand the data in their multiple layers and details. And towards the end, once the QBR is launched, it's not myself presenting. I'm presenting my chunks of the slides, and the team overcomes their, let's say, anxiety, and they take pride in their work, and they have the moment where we act as MCs for each other. And now the stage enters Irina, and now the stage enters Amy. And everyone, what happens within the company when the QBR is delivered, first, the client understands that there is not only one person that they can rely upon. There are multiple people that can share knowledge and be consultants. Second, within the team, they care about the client more. It's not only you as a CSM talking about them, but they also in the morning check the analytics, or they're part of the product, and see if everything goes well. So I think it's a win-win situation, but this is the preparation element from the one-man orchestra to have an actual orchestra that works towards the company and the client in that particular meeting, because it's a concert. Let's put it this way.
It's super interesting. Again, I always felt or dealt with the impression that, okay, QBR, it's the CSM. So CSM the scientific person goes there and presents, and it's something like an exam. This is how I always perceive the QBR. So it's the exam that you have to pass in front of the customer. So that's
awful. It's
exactly
awful.
Yeah.
And one last thing to mention, you have those moments while, I don't know, Theo or Diana, my colleagues, present, to look at the face of the customer to see if this slide actually stuck with them and the information is useful. So you are the one saying, okay, George, by the way, how are you doing this in your company? And you are generating a conversation, which usually after a one-man show QBR, you send out maybe an email or a survey, but these are static answers. They are not getting those questions, those information that, oh, and by the way, we're buying a company, and by the way, we're switching something. So these are the moments where the valuable info comes in.
Amy, now I'm super curious. How do you do it in your case?
Yeah, I mean, Cristina, I want to join one of your QBRs. They sound great. In our org, we do this. It's CS led, but within that, we've got absolute power to be able to bring in the correct person for that. The way that we kind of run them is that because, again, of the technical element of the platform, there are quite a lot of people involved day to day, regardless. So like support, for example, is always technical support. So again, you kind of form relationships with people there. There'll be other people emailing about certain areas of delivery, etc. So it's not necessarily pertinent for the structure of the QBRs to always bring anybody else in. And if anything, I tend to use them as almost like a back channel system so that they become a relationship building exercise with the absolute key people who are critical, and almost like a temperature check around on the relationship and obviously the status of projects that are in flight, for example, that kind of thing. So again, I kind of encourage you being the central resource, and by all means you can do the research that can back it up, speaking to the analyst to find out how the project's going, for example, or speaking to, looking through all of the tech support tickets, seeing what's been handled and how it's been handled recently. But again, then being that kind of central source that's prepared with information, but doesn't necessarily give it all out. Because the other thing I think that's kind of critical is to allow the customer the space to speak. And I think the original question was, how do you structure a QBR? And we've done a lot of iterations as well. And I think what we were actually hammering people with too soon was the slightly more practical element. This is your usage. This is where your contract's at. This is your, number of connected data sources, etc. Rather than actually letting the conversation and the story take flight. And it goes back to my preparation question. If you work out what's the best outcome and the worst outcome, you can also then control that narrative. Even if you ask broad, open questions, you already know what it is you're controlling or where you're trying to get that person to. And then when you come to the kind of later stages where maybe you've got analytics, or maybe you need to talk about their renewals or their usage has been dropping and that kind of thing, you've actually already got a bunch of ammo, because they've already told you, oh, our sales director left, or oh, this thing, or we've had a change here, or we've decided to get rid of this platform. And then you can say, but I'm sure that that's just because of this, right? And you actually plan to start using this module again. And then it means that your kind of QBRs then come on a bit of a narrative arc naturally, because you've done that preparation, you've asked them all of the contextual questions, and then you get to the hard facts towards the end. And I've tend to found that allows difficult conversations to be easier. Again, because you've already proven all of that value earlier on. They've said loads of great things about how their usage is going, or how a new starter has adopted the platform, or whatever it is. And then when it comes around to it, if you say, and your renewal's coming up in 3 months, and they say, nah, things are actually going pretty badly, you already know that that's not true, because you've had all of the background of good information so far. So again, I think always, if you're going to hit people with reality, do it towards the end of the call and control the narrative to get to that point.
That's a very good piece of advice. And I wanna ask you, because it wasn't actually your one of your main challenges, but I'm curious, who do you actually invite in your QBRs, and how do you identify the right stakeholders? I know that Cristina answered at the beginning of the conversation. Now I know, how do you pick the right people, and who do you invite, and how do you reach out? How do you infiltrate into the organization to find out the right person in your case?
Yeah, so I think you've got to accept that there will be a natural, let's say, condensation over time of who's joining those QBRs, and it will become the people who are key decision makers on the platform itself. You know, be it like a head of the department or the actual end users, whatever it is, who are key responsible people. Again, if you're running the QBRs correctly, then you should actually maintain a fairly stable number of people who attend regardless. If that's 3 people and it stays 3, then you're doing a good job. What I'd say though, if you do need to engage other people outside of it, you need to make it exceptionally clear that it's going to be a different conversation this time, and that you need this person to join for this reason. I don't think you can just expect that some new C-level person who's joined a company would actually find it interesting. And if anything, they've probably handed it off. And also the head of the department, for example, are probably quite proud of the relationship that they've built with you. And then they kind of can gatekeep. So I think don't be afraid if your QBRs remain what they are. Okay. If you really need to have like a separate conversation with somebody, reach out directly to them. And I think that feeling that kind of level of executive confidence, let's call it, to say to somebody who's new at the company, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm looking after your account. Do you have time for a 20-minute meeting, just the 2 of us? And I can give you a very quick intro. Because again, QBRs have kind of got a bit of a bad name for themselves, which is no one's fault, but they can become repetitive. So instead, if you just maybe create that separate back channel, you can then also weave that into future conversations and future QBRs based on whatever you find out.
I want to take a question from our audience. Roxana asked, how can CSM fully digitize MBRs? I don't know, I think it's monthly business reviews. MBRs. Okay, MBR. Do we also have monthly, quarterly? Okay, so the questions, how can CSM fully digitize MBRs and QBRs to eliminate the time spent on manual preparing PowerPoint presentations? Who wants to take this?
Well, go ahead, Amy.
Go for Cristina.
From this perspective, I think from the digitalization point, in case you have like customers that are aligned in terms of what they track or what they do, and your tool is also in this direction with the reporting capabilities, and you can, I don't know, download specific Excel files and schedule them to populate certain decks, or send out newsletters with some snapshots with the key numbers in order for them to make sense of them. I think it's a possibility. However, it's also a risk sometimes because you're just shooting in the dark. You're not getting the feedback loop. And it might, with the sense of artificial intelligence and everything being with chatbots and automated, to be thrown in an let's say spam folder that it's another email I got from a certain company. So it comes with a certain risk. Maybe just to create a template that you can repurpose in terms of PowerPoints, and just fill out the numbers from 1 month or 1 quarter to another, and keep a certain structure if you are aligned with the customer and the goals they have, and they're okay with that.
Amy, is there anything you would like to add on what Cristina said?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, for a customer to be heard, you can't just ask them the same questions quarter on quarter, or month on month especially. So you've got to make sure that your meetings are responding to whatever it is that they've said to you before. And for if you're just going to do the same thing again and again, that's when a meeting should be an email, back to the earlier conversation. So why host something if you're not going to include the nuance from the meeting before, is always my thinking with it. But I agree, a really strong template, even like a bank of questions that come up kind of time and time again, or maybe like at the start of the quarter, if you've got particular objectives that your line manager is pushing for, maybe think of a few like open questions that you can include in your QBRs and test them. And say you've got a couple in a week, or, you know, depending on your cadence, 3 in a week. You could maybe say, this week, I'm going to test out this group of questions to see if I can get to this outcome, and keep the general structure the same. So again, like, it depends how you want to work it, but I'd say I would personally never advocate for literally copy paste month on month, because a customer will just stop coming to the meetings and then they'll stop engaging with you, and then they'll probably churn because somebody else, as Cristina said, will be breathing down their neck, promising them world-class CS that they don't feel that they can get with you. And I think you do only have a certain amount of time to create a second chance if you start to lose that momentum with a customer.
I want to, remember that I compared the QBRs in those meetings with the exams, and the client is actually the teacher and is assessing your performance. I do have some nightmares from the education part of my life. There is another nightmare that I have, not only in QBRs, because I'm not a customer success manager per se, but I think that those meetings that are happening with no camera and there's no reaction, and you go and you invested a lot of time and you prepared, and then the customer on the other side is like, okay, thank you very much, bye. How do you spark this interest? How do you try to build a conversation when basically the customer doesn't want it, but he is politely showing up in the meeting because he didn't want you to say no? Cristina?
Well, those are the hard ones. Let's put it this way. Well, I think it comes down to the personality. In my case, I ask questions. I try to go through the window, through the door. I guess the sales history comes in. And I if I get a question with no answer or a one-worded answer, I go to the next slide. I try my best with another added goal, and at the end just ask an open question. Okay, so from the what is current your goals that you are looking after? What is the things that you're focused right now? So throw it into their garden in order for them to have the possibility to answer, and don't guess a lot. So try once, try twice. If you see the struggle, ask open questions and bridge them back. So there is this technique. If you ask a question, they answer, and then you ask another one, they answer, and then going to the previous question and elaborate. So in this way, maybe they have, I don't know, it's their personality that comes in until they warm up and start asking questions. Maybe it's them not being comfortable because they don't understand certain metrics or the decks you're presenting. So I don't know, you can ask, are you familiar with this concept? Do you need more information? Maybe, and this will give you an idea how to switch up your narrative. Maybe you are too technical, maybe you're too excited and presented the, I don't know, words that are not unknown to them. So even they're common high-end roles, sometimes people need a bit of a warm-up in order to open up.
I want to give you another, I would say, dramatic scenario, or not necessarily dramatic, because I think it's something that happens more frequently than we would want to. The champion with whom you built the relationship is leaving between the meetings where, okay, and I'm gonna add an extra layer. So the champion is leaving, and you also have those type of and it's a new customer with whom you had I don't know, 1 or 2 QBRs up at this point. Amy, how do you keep things moving when the key advocate isn't there anymore? Do you start from the very beginning, or do you start another selling? Do you start the selling process again? How do you do this part?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of critical pieces of information in that. So presumably, I mean, depending on the contract length, they'll be having a successor coming into the company. And theoretically, if they have taken it on and they're leaving a company a couple of months after joining, you still, hopefully, if you've got like a year-long contract, got a decent amount of time to hope to build up that relationship with the person that comes next. So I'd say number one, try not to panic. Even if you feel like you've got to go do it all again, like just remain calm. You have got time to do this. I think what is critical then is to bring other members of your team into this. One, you need to bring out the big guns. So if this requires speaking to people, heads of product, that kind of thing, you need to really wow them and put this product center stage, because when the newcomer comes in, not only have they not purchased it, but they might well have preferences that aren't your platform. So again, this puts potentially the relationship at risk. So I think that what you really need to kind of prepare yourself for, and hopefully given a bit of warning, is putting your best foot forwards into what is essentially a brand new sales process, because like it happens all the time. People move jobs a lot. And I think that it will always put your accounts at risk when this happens. And yeah, the best thing you can do is prepare yourself and think, again, like a salesperson, put that bit of extra effort into meetings, make sure these decks are world-class decks, even if you can start to share some links with this new person about why it's effective, or anything new that you can really kind of turn it up to 11. And then obviously the relationship should hopefully just sail off after that point. But I think like in those instances, you do almost need to prepare yourself for the worst, as I've said, and therefore react effectively and quickly to make sure that you don't just churn an account because they just weren't that sure about you from the start.
Because I also want to be wisely with the time, and we only have 8 more minutes. There was a question on the chat. I think you covered it, Cristina. Alice asked, how do you encourage clients to contribute? I would say that through constant questioning, through the questions that you ask that build up on each other. Do you feel the need to add more, or to maybe summarize it, just to make sure that Alice got her answer?
Sure. So practically open questions. Once you have like a deck with sections, at each section, make sure to prepare some questions in order for the audience to engage. Don't leave the Q&A towards the end. So sometimes people will forget the first 3 slides. So after 3 slides, prepare a question and make sure the client answers. Sometimes before preparing the QBR, you can send out the agenda beforehand and ask, do you want to have a dedicated 10-minute session for you to present something, maybe any updates within the company, any specific elements, that so they can be also responsible for the QBR. And we had use cases like that as well. So yeah, there are various possibilities, but questions are the way to go. And make sure, for example, this is my idea, don't be alone in the QBR. Even though if you have a colleague that is in on listen mode, maybe that colleague is going to be sharing the screen on your behalf. So you are out of the question with the next slide, and you are ready to ask questions and look at people's faces, because as we know, when you share a screen, usually the videos go out, so you don't see the reactions.
I know that both of you mentioned that those type of meetings were iteration on iteration, and there wasn't a bulletproof plan from the very beginning. And what you are using as if today is the result of everything of multiple rounds of iteration. I have to ask, how do you measure the impact of those QBRs and EBRs or NBRs? How do you, so what are your KPIs? What are the metrics that are important? and decides what you need to change to the next one. And that's a question for both of you. Amy, we start with you, and then I want to hear what Cristina has to say.
Sure. I think if I start really simply, and then I'll maybe go a bit more nuanced. So the simple fact is that if you're having effective customer meetings, you'll be able to tell through your retention metrics. So the kind of overall company goal, I'm sure, is net revenue retention, or however your company names it. And I think that that's more of a long-term view in how your customers are reacting to the interaction, the product, and you also being able to predict their behaviors through effective QBRs and obviously tracking their usage and stuff. On a more nuanced level, it depends on the company, but we effectively use like call recording tools, and that can give you a bunch of insights into how engaged people are in meetings, and also allows you to, you know, interrogate the meetings. Listen back to your own calls. I know pretty much everyone hates listening back to themselves, but if you speed it up a bit, you barely sound like yourself. It's fine. Just speed it up and have it on when you're like doing the washing up. And if you're like, why did I say that? Or my intro then was completely terrible.
Okay.
There's a human need to like forget everything you've just said. But actually, if you face up to that and then coach yourself, you can probably end up with a bit of a better result, I'd say, at the end.
Cristina?
Yeah, I totally agree. Relying on technology in order to improve yourself moving forward, and also with the risk of being repetitive, you might get out of a QBR saying that it was great, I presented everything awesome, and someone to hear and give you some critical or constructive feedback, let's put it this way, besides the client that has the engagement sometimes from a polite way. So the engagement rate, answering the questions, and this is more like intuitively, subjectively, but looking at the goals that you set for the QBR. So I want this QBR to present, I don't know, the new outcomes of the tool, maybe get some adoption for X and Y, and you rewrite that in the next steps after you finish the QBR, send out the email and see if those are actually adopted, or you have a practical approach to, I don't know, start a project, or what you aimed for that next 3 months, because the next QBR is coming and you have to say what you've achieved compared to the previous quarter. So you need to make sure you deliver upon what was promised and what you agreed with them. So having those next steps is one of the elements we look as a metric.
Time really does fly, and we are almost at the end of our session. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I hope you find some valuable takeaways on how to make your customer meetings more effective and impactful. A huge thank you once again, Cristina and Amy, for sharing your insights. And it's been a pleasure having you both with us today. And of course, before we go, just one last reminder about us, Custify. And if you are looking to save time and focus more on building that real connections that we've been talking about today, we are here to help you streamline and automate those repetitive tasks so you can do just that, build meaningful relationship with your customers. Once again, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you at our next session.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.